a management succession plan is not only naming who is going to run various aspects of the business, it's also going to say that, we're going to continue to compensate you if something happens to me. And here's the level, and here's how long we're going to do that for without interference. And it's going to tell the reader, the person who's, subject to the plan, what that person is in charge of and what they're not allowed to do. And then
Mhm.
we have oversight for everybody. There needs to be a board of directors or a board of managers or some committee that has set up, not just your spouse who might not know anything about the business or how to conduct it, but also others that may be involved with the business and outsiders as well. So we build a management succession plan, and there's an example of that on our author's website that everyone can look at waynezell.com, that syncs up the management of the business with the ownership of the business so that there's no disparity between how the business will operate if something happens to you.
This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end-of-life tasks.
I'm your host, Adam Zuckerman, and today we're joined by Wayne Zell. He's the CEO of Zell Law and author of Your Multimillion Dollar Exit. Now, Wayne's been guiding entrepreneurs through high-stakes exit planning for over 35 years. He's saved them millions and millions of dollars as they transform the way that they think about succession planning. Wayne, it's a pleasure to have you here today to discuss the art of a well-planned exit.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to be on your show.
Thank you. So you often say that business exit planning should start at the very beginning of an entrepreneur's journey. Why is that? Why do early steps need to be taken to help founders set themselves up for a successful exit? And do they really need to start at the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, Stephen Covey is the guy that I pulled that from. You need to start doing everything, your business planning, everything at the beginning. But the reason that I insist on it, and I have a son-in-law who just opened up his own business in cybersecurity. I think it's really critical to plan for any given point in time along the journey of the entrepreneur. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when you're going to die. You don't know if you're going to become disabled. And what kind of planning have you done in anticipation of those unexpected events, and then also the expected events of when you want to get out of the business. And the other thing about exit planning, and as a certified exit planner with the Business Enterprise Institute, I believe that, again, planning begins at the beginning because you have to have a plan to exit whatever business you're in. So if you're in your business, for example, which is a very successful new business and growing rapidly, you're in the rocket ship phase. You're launching, you're taking off, you're having a great time. But you still have to have a plan as to when you're going to either terminate your involvement with the business by selling it to a third party, giving it to your family, having your management team succeed. You may not even have thought about that yet. You're just creating new stuff, and your clients are coming on board from all over the country. You still need to think about your exit, and it's just part of business planning. So I would say you need to think about it at the beginning.
Let's talk about that. I completely agree that you need to have your ducks in a row. It's the corollary to having all the information in one place for your personal life. And the business side of things just gets more and more complicated as the business grows. But there's a saying that the number one resource for any entrepreneur isn't money. It's not people, it's not product, but rather it's time. And setting your business up for success, when you're looking at succession planning, that does take time. When should people literally start taking steps as opposed to thinking about it? Is it before you form your LLC? Is it when you switch over to a C Corp if you do that? And what are some of those tangible steps that people actually need to take?
Well, as you know, part of it involves estate planning. So if you've got a family, you need to plan for your family. So if something happens to you unexpectedly, you've got to have life insurance in place. You've got to have revocable trusts in place, which we can talk about today as to why I prefer that over just a will. You need to have a management succession plan in place so that there's transferable value for this new business that you're starting. And I know everybody says, look, I've got to spend 24/7 on my business just to get it up and operating and make it successful. There's always time for fun. There's always time for rest. Everybody needs to rest because you need to recharge your batteries. And there's time for planning. And part of the planning process is setting aside time to think about the inevitable and also the unexpected, and also what you want to do at the end of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whenever it is that you want to exit this business. So you set a time at the end and back plan from there. And it's spending time on a periodic basis, maybe quarterly, maybe annually initially, because the entrepreneurs that I work with, and that's who I work with almost exclusively, are always planning, but they're always executing and implementing, and they're building and building and growing. And so the idea is, I think it's really important to set aside that time,
Mhm.
allocate that time out of your schedule, just as you would take a vacation. Take time for the planning, and the business planning process involves exit planning.
Now, there's a saying that it's the Goldilocks theory, effectively. So, what the right size porridge and right heat porridge for you, or right temperature porridge for you, might not be for someone else. And there's a lot of different ways to skin that proverbial cat. So, if you come to the website and you say, I need a will, we show you that you can do it yourself with an online provider or with an attorney. You can take that same approach with succession planning and estate planning as well. Zell Law fits in a very unique niche where you guys are working with entrepreneurs mostly to help them, figure out what they need. Can you talk a little bit about Zell Law so people understand the perspective that you're coming from? What's the
Yeah.
size of the business? Where you're located? What are the services that you offer?
We're a boutique. We're a small firm located in Reston, Virginia. But I started out at Arthur Anderson and Company in the tax department in 1980, and as a CPA. And so I worked as a CPA. I worked at Price Waterhouse in their national tax office, Coopers and Lybrand, before they merged. Those two firms merged. I had a lot of background in tax compliance, but also tax planning. From the tax, everything sort of evolved. The estate planning spun off from it, and the business planning spun off from it. So we are an estate and business planning boutique, and we really do focus, at least my energies are focused about half on each of those areas with that tax underpinning. So everything that we do, we're always considering, the income tax effect, the gift and estate tax effect, the generation skipping transfer tax effects, how to plan for that, how to minimize it, how to mitigate taxes, but also plan for your family. Make sure that you've provided for your family. So we work closely with financial advisors all across the country. We've got clients not only in the DC metro area, but all across the country, from Texas to California to Washington to Florida to New York, everywhere. We're not licensed in all those jurisdictions. We work with local counsel to execute those documents, but we usually get involved in the structuring and the drafting. And sometimes it's really, really complex. And sometimes it's very basic blocking and tackling, like you've featured on your podcast. I've listened to some of your podcasts. The guests are great. We do all that, but we stay within our lane. We try not to go out and do, trademark work. We'll refer
Mhm.
that stuff out, or intellectual property, analysis. We do review contracts. I do a lot of executive compensation because of the tax effects of creating phantom stock plans or non-qualified plans. But entrepreneurs always want to know about that stuff. And so we do a lot of that for our entrepreneurial clients. So we try to stay within our lanes. We'll help with fiduciary matters, meaning that sometimes we'll serve as a fiduciary trustee, or we'll help the trustee or executor navigate through the process of trust and estate administration, which is why it's great to meet you, because you guys really have laid out a whole process and series of checklists and products that are really built for people. Now, one thing I'm going to disagree with you on is
Yeah.
no one worth their salt should ever use a do-it-yourself will, a legal Zoom will or whatever. And there's multiple reasons for that. But the main reason is it's like, a brain surgeon performing, doing tax work. I'm not going to do brain surgery on you. And so involved in what we do sometimes is as complicated as, not brain surgery, but it's pretty complicated stuff. It involves employee retirement benefits. It involves, designating beneficiaries properly. It involves
Mhm.
planning for somebody's incapacity. It involves really understanding the psychology of the families and the kids that have grown up in those families, and how they're doing, how they're spending money, where they were educated, do they care about that? All of these things become really paramount. And unless you have had the experience that we've had, and I mean, I've been doing this now for 39 years as a lawyer and 44 as a CPA, unless you've had the experience of dealing with all these different issues, it's hard to really anticipate what the issues are and to morph a document that might be created online into what you want. Now, With that said, 5 years from now, maybe 10, probably 5 years from now, AI is going to change all of that. And we'll be reviewing documents that the client tries to create that uses an AI-driven process where
Mhm.
you learn how to ask the right questions and then get responses. But, as you go online, you use ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever, any of those AI tools that you use today, you may not get exactly the right answer. In fact, my wife, she runs our marketing. She'll create a blog for me on a spousal lifetime access trust, which is a technique we use. And I read the blog that's created by AI, and it's pretty good,
Mhm.
but it's missing a couple of pieces here that you wouldn't know whether or not you're missing it in your online will or your online trust or advanced medical directive or whatever. So you have to be able to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing to ask questions and give you good answers and help you get to the solution that you need specifically. So
Yeah.
enough said
No,
about that.
I think we're actually in agreement there. The way that we approach it is you need to start and create your estate plan today for tomorrow, and it has to evolve with you over time. We
Yes.
actually have a quiz on the site. It's free and it asks you a variety of different questions and it gives you a rating. You are better suited speaking with an actual attorney because you have this, this, and this.
Right.
And the individuals that we say you may qualify for a very basic will is somebody that is literally turning 18, 25. They don't own a house, don't own a car, small assets, very, very simple. No kids, no blended marriages. But I cannot agree with you more, Wayne, that as people get older, as their situations in life expand, as their assets under management hopefully grows as well, or their family relationships get more complicated, working with an actually experienced attorney in your jurisdiction is the way to go.
I agree.
All right. So you've worked with a bunch of different entrepreneurs. What are some of those factors that they need to consider when they're building their customized plan? Because, like you said, there's a lot of different things to consider. Walk us through some of the questions that you may ask and go through the process of to help people really narrow in on what they need.
Well, the first question is, where do you live and what state do you live? Because every state has its own rules regarding how assets can pass from you after you die. And then, what is the value of your estate? What are the values of the assets that you own? What are your debts? And so doing some financial planning up front is absolutely critical. So we work closely. We do not do financial planning, but we work closely with financial planners of all shapes and sizes, because I think it's really important to have a financial planner in your corner to help you anticipate what you're going to need 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years from now. And have you planned well enough for that? And if you're not there yet, what do you need to do to get there? And so the financial planner gives me more input as to what this particular client is going to need, whether it's an entrepreneur or just a mom and pop, coming in for basic estate planning. And that's the first thing that we want to do is we want to know the size of the estate, how the assets are titled, where they are, where you live. And then we start talking about things like probate and avoiding it. In Maryland, it's not quite as bad as it is in Virginia, and anything in DC is bad, um, because there's nobody there that can really answer your questions and get you through the probate process. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and we've handled probate in the three local jurisdictions, and to me, you definitely don't want to go through probate in Washington D.C., even though it's an unsupervised process. To get anything done, it's very difficult, but you want to plan to avoid probate. So let me give you an example. I own stock in my new C corporation that I just set up, or I just set up an LLC. It's just me, and I'm going to do consulting. If I die in any jurisdiction that I reside, wherever I live, that LLC ownership interest, the membership interest, is going to go through probate unless I put it into a revocable trust, which is why for all our clients, we insist, particularly for entrepreneurs, that you start out by having your basic estate planning done and that you have your assets, particularly your business asset, in a revocable trust so that it bypasses the court system. Why? We avoid having to file inventories. We avoid having to disclose the value of our business. We avoid having to open that for public disclosure, because in every state you can get access to the probate filings that are made. And most importantly, you avoid accountings. And in Virginia, you avoid probate tax on top of all of that. So they impose a tax on any assets that have to go through the court system in our jurisdiction, it's commissioner of accounts. In your jurisdiction in Montgomery County, it's the register of wills, but you have to file something to get the process moving. When you have to file something, you usually have to hire a lawyer. It costs money. When you go to court, they charge you for the process of filing. So they review the filings. In Virginia, they charge hourly for that. In Maryland, there are set fees that they charge. So you avoid that whole encumbrance, all that cost and delay that could be caused by probate, number one. Number two, I also then talk to the entrepreneur about what's your business plan? Who's running your business? Who's your management team? If you had to take 6 months off, like one of my clients who jumped out of a helicopter and broke his back when he was skiing after he jumped out of the helicopter, didn't have a management succession plan. And so he appointed his CFO to take care of everything. And I said, are you sure that's going to be enough? He said, yeah. Came back after recuperating and found that $1 million was missing out of his business. This is a big company locally, 40 million in revenue approximately. And $1 million was missing, and a bunch of revenues had declined from various customers. The CFO was basically diverting assets to a new business that he started that was competing with the business that he was supposed to be running. So a management succession plan is not only naming who is going to run various aspects of the business, it's also going to say that, we're going to continue to compensate you if something happens to me. And here's the level, and here's how long we're going to do that for without interference. And it's going to tell the reader, the person who's, subject to the plan, what that person is in charge of and what they're not allowed to do. And then we have oversight for everybody. There needs to be a board of directors or a board of managers or some committee that is set up, not just your spouse who might not know anything about the business or how to conduct it, but also others that may be involved with the business and outsiders as well. So we build a management succession plan. And there's an example of that on our author's website that everyone can look at waynezell.com that syncs up the management of the business with the ownership of the business so that there's no disparity between how the business will operate if something happens to you. And
When do
so
you
those are
start?
two basic things that we start with.
When do you start talking about buy-sell agreements, and how do they come into play?
Well, believe it or not, you could have a buy-sell agreement for a single owner. And how do you do that? Well, you have to think about who might step in and run the business, because if you have a buy-sell agreement for a single owner, then obviously you've bought them out. There's no shareholder. What happens to the company? You have to have an owner of the company at all times. So it's not just a buy-sell agreement. It's more like an operating agreement for an LLC or a shareholders agreement for a corporation that not only anticipates what happens if you become disabled or you die or somebody else who's an equity owner is terminated with or without cause. You want to build all that stuff into your plan, but also, how much insurance do you need? What type of insurance do you need? And how is it applied? Not to go off on a tangent, there's a U.S. Supreme Court case that came out this year called Connolly. And that case basically now stands for the proposition, in opposition to two circuits that had a different conclusion, that if your company owns life insurance on you, it's included in the value of the company for estate tax purposes, which I don't agree with, but there are ways to mitigate that too. So a buy-sell agreement is not just a simple agreement that you enter into with two owners or one owner or four owners. It's a much more complicated exercise of building in the management succession as well. So you can have a management succession plan that says, how am I going to continue the business? Something happens to me that I don't expect, but the buy-sell agreement may or may not require me to be bought out on my death, because I may want my family to continue owning at least a piece of the business so that they can benefit from the growth that I have started to create in my business. So I'd say buy-sell agreements start when you have two owners at least, and you're planning for the possible early demise by going out and purchasing life insurance, perhaps on each other through some type of cross-purchase arrangement. But if you have the company buying it, you got to be aware of this Connolly decision. So how do we protect ourselves down the road? I'd say the minute you have two owners, you should start talking about it. And if you have one owner, you need to still plan for business succession, because What happens if something happens to you? What happens to the company? Are we going to get life insurance? Is the life insurance enough to protect the family? And is it enough to compensate you for the value of the business that you've built? I have
That's
this
right.
discussion daily with clients.
Yeah, and one of those conversations that we've had far too often is what happens if I don't have an agreement in place to the company, to my business partner, and suddenly your business partner or yourself could be in business with people that you had no interest in being in business with at all, because their interest would go to
Yeah.
whoever they have in their will.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I've been involved in multiple litigations over the years and arbitrations and mediations over that issue.
Hmm.
What rights do I have as a spouse of a deceased owner? What rights do I have as the owner of the company? What did the buy-sell agreement do, and was it really done right to protect the family, to protect the other owners? And it becomes a major issue when you're structuring the governance of the whole company. So I think it's subsumed within the whole concept of how do I manage the company if something happens to me? How do I manage the company on a day-to-day basis? Who is serving with me on the management committee or the board of directors? What are the roles of all these people, which might be in bylaws and shareholders agreement combined for a corporation or an operating agreement for an LLC? And how do I link all this stuff together? And you can't anticipate everything at the front end, but you should start planning for it.
Yeah. No, there's two times that a business could be transitioned. One is at the death of an individual if they're an owner, or also before they pass away. It's a pretty binary
What
approach.
happens if they're disabled?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that happens before they pass away if they're going to transfer it. So that would fall under the second. But
Yeah.
it's
Do you have
certainly
insurance to
possible.
cover you for that? Or do you
Yeah.
need it? Or can you afford it? These
Yeah.
are all questions that we deal with. So,
All the decision trees.
yep.
So let's talk about maximizing the business value in either of those scenarios. So in your book, you emphasize the importance of filling the value gaps to ensure that top dollar exit. What are some of the practical steps that entrepreneurs can take to identify and close those gaps?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that I like my clients to do is get a valuation. It doesn't have to be a formal valuation with a report that's 80 pages long, but it should be some reasonable valuation done by somebody with expertise in appraising businesses. And it could be a CPA, but it's usually a certified valuation analyst or somebody like that who's got credentials in valuing business. And you get a benchmark for what your business is worth today. And a lot of my entrepreneur clients are going to say, "Oh, it's 10 times earnings." No, it's not. And you've been in the hedge fund world, Adam, so you understand, some of the predilections of these entrepreneurs. And what your neighbor sold his business for, even if it was in the same industry, is not what you're going to sell your business for. Okay. So everybody it depends on what's going on in the marketplace, what comparable businesses of comparable size in your industry are being sold for. And if you're a small business, which we represent a lot of small businesses, there's not a lot of comparable businesses out there. So you have to know how to do a discounted cash flow analysis. So anyway, you get a valuation, figure out what it's worth today. And you say, oh, it's not worth what I thought it was worth. One, two, I need it to be worth a heck of a lot more if I'm going to retire, because my financial planner told me I need 7, 10 million, $20 million to live the way I want to for the rest of my life. So how do I get there? So the next point is to bring in somebody who can help identify the value gaps. I'm not the expert in that. I'm going to bring in a consultant, usually an investment banker or a business broker or a business evaluator that can say, okay, look, for a government contractor of your size that's doing mostly subcontracting or prime contracting, as an example, here are the value drivers that a business like yours needs. Always at the top, always at the top. To create transferable value is to have a really good management team that can take over from you if you can't run the business any longer. And so what I look for all my clients is, tell me about your managers. Tell me about how long they've been with you, what their experiences are, how sophisticated they are, and who's going to run the business if something happens to you. So we have this example in the book that sort of runs all the way from chapter 1 through chapter 6 of the book that is a hypothetical of a guy that hadn't done his exit planning, and all of a sudden he finds out he's got stage 4 prostate cancer. That's not everybody, right? But this happens to people. And so you have to plan as if something could happen to you. And then identifying the value drivers is a function of your industry. So I do a lot of work with government contractors in cybersecurity and technology. I work a lot with technology companies, real estate companies, home improvement companies, roofers. I've probably sold 175 different businesses over my career of varying sizes. And we do on average 3 or 4 a year. So you get an idea of what the value drivers are for a specific business, but then you bring in somebody to help you fill the value gaps where your value drivers are weak.
Hmm.
So identify the value drivers that you need for the business to maximize the value on exit if you're going to sell it in 5 or 10 years, and get people involved either as an advisory board or outside consultants or a combination of the two to help direct you as a CEO, as the owner, as the entrepreneur, to identify what the value gaps are and then help fill in those value gaps. We help fill in the value gaps on the corporate governance, on the documentation for the business, on their contracts, making sure that, there's good solicitation agreements in place for employees and, things like that that are enforceable depending on the state that you're living in and so on. But you want to get a team together.
Hmm.
And we talk about your rock star team that you want to assemble. Well, one of them is going to be an estate planning lawyer. One of them is going to be a business lawyer. One of them is going to be a CPA who's got good understanding of financial accounting. And it may be a different CPA who's helping you with on the ongoing tax planning and compliance, or maybe a combination of those. I've got one client, he's in the renovation and home building business. And he's got 2 CPAs. One helps do the tax compliance and one that helps do the planning, because the tax compliance guy doesn't know how to do the planning very well, but they're very good at the compliance. So, he divides the roles between these people. You need an insurance person, you need a financial planner, you need a good banker on your side if you're going to be borrowing, and most, growing businesses need some form of borrowing capacity, so you have to have a good
Hmm.
relationship with your bank. So, those are examples of who would be filling in the Rockstar team to help you fill the value gaps and help grow you to the point where you are comfortable saying, oh, the business is worth this now. And then the question is, what is your exit plan? Are you going to have your family step into it, which is a small percentage of businesses in the overall scheme of things, but they're very complicated matters when you're dealing with family. And then are you going to have a management team? Are you going to have a combination of a management team with your family, or are you going to sell it to some outside third party and exit completely? So, I mean,
Yeah.
those are the things that I look at when I come in.
You have the external partners, the service providers that are experts in their field, the attorneys, the CPAs, and whatnot.
Yep.
But you also mentioned that one of the first things that you look at is the management team and the employees and how things will continue after you're gone. Now, we believe in Buried in Work that paying it forward is unbelievably important. We believe that it is a team approach that makes many companies successful. And one of the things that you stress on your website and the book is to also look after your employees. What are some of those best practices that ensures that the people that made your company possible, that helped you grow it along the way, are in fact well cared for after a sale and an exit?
Great question. I start out with base comp. Have you benchmarked your base comp for the people that are working for you, the base compensation? Next, what's your bonus plan for them to incentivize them to make the company profitable so that there's profit to share? Whether it's in the form of some kind of qualified plan or just a regular bonus plan that you're paying out somebody a percentage of their compensation every year for achieving their key performance indicators or their objectives that you've set up for them. Start off with that, but then work from there and say, how do I keep these people here motivated and intrigued? So building, again, on the side of the financial side of things, providing good benefits, a great workplace environment, a qualified plan, a way of, supporting, their families, maybe a legal support plan or, cafeteria plans, flexible spending plans, things like that. And then beyond that, long-term incentive plans. What kind of long-term incentives can you build into your business to really incentivize the key managers that will stay there all the way through to the end? Like, If we sell, I'm going to give you a transaction bonus. If we
Mhm.
sell, I'm going to keep you here with the business so that you can keep running the business and I can retire in the form of a retention bonus after the sale.
So you think it's a good idea to engage with certain employees, not necessarily all of them, but certain employees before the process is finalized?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, I think it's disingenuous to, offer a bonus at the closing table.
Mhm.
And a lot of my clients will do that because one, they don't want anyone to know that they're thinking about selling the business, and that might take the employees' eyes off the ball and start having them look elsewhere for employment. But if you actually build in a retention plan that incentivizes them to stay and even making them equity owners of the company, I mean,
Mhm.
that's not one of my favorite things because I've had to deal with the companies that I represent with minority shareholders. It can result in problems later on if you give the wrong amount of equity or the wrong person equity. And so, you may be involved in litigation, but there are ways around that using synthetic equity, phantom stock, stock appreciation rights, restricted stock, things like that. But the idea is to really think about who is going to run this thing if something happens to me, for the benefit of my family, for the benefit of a buyer, for the benefit of themselves. Maybe they'll acquire ownership. I'm working with two founders of a pretty large government contractor here in the DC metro area, and they're exiting the business and they're getting paid, eight figures for each of their interests in the business, funded primarily by the business. We've got a whole management team and a management succession plan that they've built behind them. So they've really built a good transition plan for them to get out. And then the next question is, what about the 5 people that are going to now take over the company? Same
Mhm.
thing. You've got to have a transition plan for them. It doesn't just end with the founders. And so really sophisticated, growing and thriving companies will think about that. And then, lastly, I think the idea is you also have to lock them down so that they can't walk out with your clients, walk out with your customers, walk out with your intellectual property and your confidential information, which is enforceable. I mean, people have been talking about the Federal Trade Commission's ban on non-competes, which has been ruled invalid by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. I don't expect that to go anywhere, but it's possible that it could rear its head again, and different jurisdictions have different rules about non-competes. You just want to do something that is going to make sure that you protect your business from an errant employee who does leave and wants to compete with you or take your business with you. You've got to build in safeguards for that as well. So I like building a team atmosphere. We have that here in our business. Everybody's incentivized in different ways to contribute to the growth of our business. And although we're a small boutique, I think it's really humming and people are really happy. Part of that is outside of economics and finance. It's also talking to them about what what do they like to do? Do you have the right people in the right seats working towards some goal for themselves so that they'll be incentivized to stay and not leave and do something else or go to work for a competitor or go to work for somebody else that's not a competitor? I want to
It
keep the team together if it's humming. So how
that
do I
goes
do that?
that goes to a question of mindset, I think, and making sure that interests are aligned and that people have opportunities to grow into a role that, quite frankly, excites them and they're most productive in. Does mindset impact the success of an exit, or is it really just about the business fundamentals?
Oh, I think mindset is critical. At least my view is. I think the businesses that transition well after a sale. So a lot of times I'll do transactions for a client and I won't talk to them for a couple of years. I might pick up the phone and see how they're doing. But the question is the culture of the company that you're selling going to mesh with the culture of the buyer too? And so
Mhm.
a lot of my clients are really concerned about that and they really investigate that. I'll give you an example. I had a financial advisory firm that I represented out in San Francisco, and the owner was a classmate of mine at University of Virginia, and we went to business school together there. And she called me up. I hadn't talked to her in about 30 years. She called me up and she said, I thought of you. I've seen your blogs and stuff like that. Can you help me sell my business? I said, sure. What is it that you want to do? She said, the biggest thing for me in my profession today is I don't want to just sell my business to any financial planning firm or financial advisory firm and just be another roll-up. I want to preserve the culture that we've built and that we've worked so hard. We have 26 shareholders. We want to take care of these people, not only in the exit, but after the exit. I want them to be motivated to stay with the ongoing entity. So they narrowed down the universe to like 2 or 3 potential buyers. And we ended up negotiating with one, which was a family office. And it was a successful, very successful exit. She didn't make as much as she could have had she just sold to a private equity backed roll up of financial advisory firms. But she was really, really happy with what she got and what the other shareholders got and how they were going to mesh the cultures, because the cultures were very, very similar. So I think it's real important to take care of your employees, because they're going to be, they've spent their lives, or a good amount of their life, working for you, dedicated to you as the entrepreneur. What are you doing for them? Well, you want to keep the culture. You want to keep the environment. Some of my clients don't want to sell because they're afraid that the culture will be tainted on a sale. And so they built a succession plan that involves transitioning it to the management team or to employees as well as family members that might be involved in the business. And that's a hard transition, but it can be done.
And I think the number one takeaway here is that as your business grows, as it develops, as it becomes more sophisticated, there's a lot of those unknowns out there. And individuals like yourself can certainly help those individuals navigate that process.
Yeah, there's no cookie cutter approach to this, unfortunately. Although my next book is going to be coming up with kind of like what you're doing, checklists and ideas for the exit. How do you sort of figure out what's your critical path? What's the decision matrix that you're going to go down to get to where you want to go, and then what do you need to get there? I think that's a really process oriented, but people need that to feel comfortable getting to the exit. So they want to know what they have to do to get there. And just like you've done for end of life decisions, that's part of what I want to do as well.
I look forward to seeing it, and maybe we'll get you back on the podcast to talk about that when it's out, the complimentary book to Your Multimillion Dollar Exit.
Thank
With
you.
that, Wayne, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find you, Zell Law, where do they go?
2 great places. One is actually 3. One is waynezell.com, which is my author's website. Number 2 is Zell Law, ZELLLAW.com, which is our law firm website. And then we also have an exit planning spinoff called aspiretoexit.com, which just focuses on exit planning specifically. And sometimes it's legal and sometimes it's non-legal stuff. So that's why we separated it out.
All right, Wayne, appreciate the time today.
Adam, thanks a lot. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at buriedinwork.com.